Hey y'all. So we have just concluded the one book of the Bible. I forget just that quick which one it was. But now we are going to start Second Timothy. Um, so yeah, let's go ahead and dive into chapter 1. We're going to start with chapter context as always, and then part 1 and then part 2. So let's go ahead. Chapter 1 establishes Timothy's spiritual background. Paul expresses gratitude for Timothy by reminding him of his past in order to set the stage for later teachings. Paul first expresses gratitude for Timothy's prior faithfulness, and reminds him of how God called him into ministry. From that point, Paul encourages Timothy to be brave and to guard the truth of the gospel message. Later chapters will explain why Paul feels these traits are necessary, both for the sake of the world and for Timothy in general. Let's go ahead and get into the breakdown, part 1. Chapter 1 includes a greeting, Timothy 1 through 2, and encouragement to Timothy, 2 Timothy 1 through 5, followed by words reminding Timothy of his faith. Paul traces Timothy's faith back to his grandmother, then to his mother, and then to him. Timothy is encouraged to fan into flame the gift of God, 2 Timothy 1:6 through 7. Paul encourages Timothy not to be ashamed of Jesus or of Paul in his imprisonment. Paul gives some information about his own situation and continues to encourage Timothy to follow sound teachings and guard the good deposit entrusted into you. That's 2 Timothy 1:8 through 18. The introduction covers verses 1 to 2 and includes the author Paul and information about him, the recipient Timothy, and information about him, followed by a brief greeting. This was a common form for ancient letter writing and often used by Paul. Verses 3 through 5 speak of Paul's prayers for Timothy, 2 Timothy 1:3, his desires to see him, 2 Timothy 1:4, and a reminder of Timothy's sincere faith. This faith was strong in Timothy's family, reaching back to his mother and grandmother, 2 Timothy 1:5. Paul's letters often mention Timothy as a ministry partner, so this extended passage of gratitude is to be expected. At a time where others are abandoning Paul, according to the latter parts of the letter, he is glad to count Timothy as a faithful friend. Verses 6 through 14 bring much encouragement to Timothy. This is unique considering that Paul is in a desperate situation. He writes from a Roman jail and expects to soon die. Regardless of his circumstances, he reminds Timothy of his gift, 2 Timothy 1:6, and his power from God, 2 Timothy 1:7. Y'all know I love me that verse. And tells him not to be ashamed of Paul or of the gospel, 2 Timothy 1:8 through 12. Given that Paul often mentions the concept of bravery and courage to Timothy, this might have been a spiritual weakness which Paul was helping him to address. The final verse encourages Timothy to remain true in sound doctrine, 2 Timothy 1:13 through 14, mentioned two men who left Paul, 2 Timothy 1:15, and speaks favorably of the household of Onesiphorus. Let me figure this out, y'all. Hold on. Onesiphorus, a man who helped him while he was in jail. 2 Timothy 1:16 through 18. When others were abandoning him, Onesiphorus seems to have taken the time to track Paul down, even in a gigantic city jail system, and provide him with support. So let's go ahead and get into the breakdown part 2. 2 Timothy chapter 1 is a powerful personal letter from the aging apostle Paul to his protege Timothy, urging him to be courageous, unashamed, and steadfast in his faith and ministry despite suffering, reminding him to fan into flame his spiritual gifts, and emphasizing that God gives a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline, not fear. It's about rekindling spiritual passion, standing firm in the gospel, and trusting God's eternal purpose, even as Paul faces his own impending execution. All right, so key things and meanings. Number one, gratitude and heritage, verses 3 through 5. Paul thanks God for Timothy, highlighting his sincere faith, nurtured by his grandmother Lois and his mother Eunice, showing a legacy of belief. Number two, stirring the gift, verses 6 through 7. Paul tells Timothy to fan into flame of the gift of God, spiritual gift within him, suggesting it needs nourishing. This is supported by the truth that God gives a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline, not timidity or fear. Number three, do not be ashamed. Verses 8 and then verse 12. Paul urges Timothy to not be ashamed of the gospel or Paul's imprisonment. Instead, he calls him to share in suffering for the gospel by God's power, as Paul himself isn't ashamed because he knows Christ. Number four, God's power, verses 9 through 10. The chapter emphasizes that salvation and calling come from God's purpose, not works, made clear through Jesus Christ, who abolished death and brought life and immorality to light. Number five, trust and stewardship, verses 12 through 14. Paul states his confidence that God can guard what has been entrusted to him, his life/ministry, until that day, encouraging Timothy to guard the good deposit of sound teaching. I like that. Number six, examples of faithfulness and failure, and that's verses 15 through 18. Paul contrasts those who desert him, like who? Hold on, y'all. Okay, like Phygelus and Hermogenes, with the faithful loyalty of Jesus. Here we go with this name again. Onesiphorus, who refreshed Paul and wasn't ashamed of his claims. So in essence, 2 Timothy chapter 1 is a call to spiritual courage rooted in the empowering presence of the Holy Spirit, a deep-seated faith passed down through generations, and an unwavering commitment to the transforming message of the gospel, even in the face of hardship and persecution. That's real good right there. That's real good. All right, y'all. That is all I have for the full breakdown of 2 Timothy chapter 1, and I will see you guys later. Bye.